My favorite musicals are Sunday in the Park with George, The Drowsy Chaperone, Phantom of the Opera, and probably The Rocky Horror Show. Company's up there, so's Into the Woods, kinda. And of course, I'm partial to my debut musical, Fantasmagoriana. There's one thing, though, that all of these musicals have in common, and that is the use of a framing device. A framing device is a literary technique which involves the use of a secondary aspect providing exceptional context and structure to the primary story. I'm Cash the Composer, and today we're going to be talking about framing devices, their application in musical theater, and how I'm going to apply the concept to the show I'm writing right now. If you want to learn more as I write this show, hit that subscribe button so you can come along on the journey. I'm just now beginning the writing phase, and I'll be delving into all the various stages and challenges throughout the process, and I'm very excited to share this with you all. I'll be addressing a lot of questions that I had myself when I was younger and first thought about writing musicals, and providing the answers that I've found and my tools and processes. Today's question is, instead of telling a story straight through, is there some merit to wrapping it in a specific context in order to better shape the audience's perception of the narrative? Let's begin by looking at these several shows that do exactly that and talk about their frames and how they impact the show. Now, my definition of a framing device is a little looser than most. I'm including some which are the typical definition, that there is a dynamic secondary story occurring outside of the primary story, but I'm also including others where there is instead something static, not even necessarily a story, which provides the needed shape. Sunday in the Park with George has a quite literal framing device, the painting of Sunday in the Park at La Grande Jatte. Each scene of the first act is informed by an aspect of the painting, and George works on said painting, completing sections throughout the show, culminating in the completed piece revealed at the Act 1 closing number. There is a story happening, but there are little moments with all of these various people that are disconnected from that central story, and yet these seemingly unimportant interactions and observations are captured and immortalized in the painting. The painting is a collection of images from a series of Sundays in the same park brought together in one setting, a setting which is reflective of the impact these scenes had on the life of George and his legacy, and further commentary on the meaning of art. The story of the first act is essentially a series of vignettes, much as the painting is a series of vignettes. One reflects the other, and it's not hard to see Sondheim's inspiration. The painting in itself is massive. You have to stand back quite far to see it, but when you look up close, you see one vignette at a time, even closer, and you see only the dots, these pinpricks which don't form an image. In a way, this is identical to the structure of the show. Altogether, it's a story of art and meaning. Each scene is a glimpse into an artist's relationship with their work or with the people they love, and each song is just a facet of the whole that alone doesn't shed any light as it lacks that full context. The Drowsy Chaperone similarly uses a frame to act as a commentary on the meaning of art, but in a completely different manner. We have a man in a chair who plays a record for us, a record of his favorite Broadway show. As the show plays in front of us in his living room, he provides pointed commentary, the things he loves and the criticisms modern sensitivities require, while occasionally remarking on an aspect of his personal life. It's only at the very end that the two begin to bleed together, and we see the true impact art can have. The show within the show is undeniably catchy and fun, but simultaneously tired and trite. The interjections by the man in the chair give needed context that transforms this archetypal show into something with a history, these characters into archetypes representative of the whole genre rather than simply lazy tropes, backed by the fabrication of actors in those roles, which color the portrayal of the characters in a way that can only make you smile. You start thinking about the relationships between these actors as they've clearly played alongside one another many times before, that some of these actors are dead, and yet these characters live on, their voices singing out into the world infinitely, immortally. They're still alive, singing to the man in the chair, singing to us, on the record, on the stage, in our imaginations. It's surreal, a bonkers perspective that's simply breathtaking. The Phantom of the Opera does not have a frame that lasts the full duration of the show or even one act. Its frame is only in the first scene, a scene many would forget about were it not for the badass organ overture so famous that follows. An auction is taking place in the closed opera house, selling off various artifacts which represent several marked events in the coming show. First, we have a poster for the show of Hannibal, where Christine makes her debut, the instigating event of the show. Additionally, the story of Hannibal is in itself a story of triumph against overwhelming odds, leading to an inevitable loss at the end despite his brilliance, mirroring the story of the Phantom. Then we have a pistol and 3 human skulls from Robert Le Diable, a show which involves a woman being caught between 2 men, ending up with the man she wanted while another man is dragged to hell. Additionally, there are 3 deaths in the show: Joseph Bouquet, Piangi, and the death prior to the show of Christine's father, Gustave Daye. Penultimately, you have the Phantom's music box featuring the melody that will play throughout the show, and of course, finally, the famed chandelier that features in both the closing of Act 1 and in the climax. This scene is short, but impactful, setting up the plot of the show in just 4 short moments. Foreshadowing isn't quite what's happening here. It's more something that one can appreciate upon rewatching the musical. You have the thematic nature of the show, an approximation of the plot, and a marker of the coming deaths, a symbol of the Phantom's good, his music, and a symbol of the bad, the damned chandelier. And that is something unique to theater. Rewatchability. Yeah, you can reread a book or rewatch a movie, but musicals can be enjoyed at least 4 distinct ways: seeing the show on stage, seeing a recorded version, listening to the album, and reading the libretto. And all of these things are things that can and should, and usually are, done many, many times. I take every opportunity I can to see a show in person, even if I've seen that particular show before 50,000 times, because each new production is an entirely new experience. We listen to the songs on our preferred software as much as we listen to any music, and librettos are designed to be read and reread and studied, whether you're planning on playing a character or directing the show or just imagining your own interpretations. This type of thing isn't something that could work in a medium that isn't so repeatable. Speaking of repeatable, the Rocky Horror Show features the criminologist, a man with no neck, who discusses the nature of the Denton affair. He provides some commentary and context for scenes, as well as a dry, stalwart humor, which greatly contrasts the flamboyant and hysterical nature of literally every other character in the show. He acts as the coordinator between the audience and the story, trying to reconcile the absolutely strange and ridiculous with a more grounded reality. The pacing of Rocky Horror is quite off, with certain parts being unbearably slow, the plot jumping forward with lurches rather than a steady advance. However, this is just slightly mitigated by the narrator, whose interjections between scenes help blend things into a more palatable, cohesive narrative. Now, Company is a weird show, a collection of scenes in some order that definitely isn't chronological. It is framed by the concept of a birthday, symbolized in 3 scenes: an opening birthday party wherein Bobby fails to blow out their candles, not knowing what they want; a do-over of that birthday party wherein Bobby actually makes a wish but can't quite finish blowing out the candles; and a final version of the birthday where Bobby doesn't show up at all, and their friends remark on their hope for Bobby's future. It's symbolic, or it isn't. Quite honestly, Company is a show with a lot of room for interpretation, given its less than traditional setup. The only structure in the show is this birthday, a birthday that happens 3 times. It's clearly the same birthday, not year after year, instead showing the evolution of Bobby's character through what could have been, what would have been, and what is. The fact that the story begins and ends in the same time, at the same place, but worlds apart in meaning, isn't confusing at all, unless you try to explain it out loud like I am. In the actual show, it makes perfect sense, I swear, somehow. Into the Woods is a bunch of fairy tales cobbled together until they fall apart. A narrator tells the story until the characters sacrifice him in a desperate attempt to save themselves. This leaves those characters without a guide to tell them what to do, what will happen, what comes next. It is further commentary on the thread through the show of what it means to have a child, or rather, what it means to be a child and ignore the advice of a parent as you grow up. A child is like a story in that way, and oh my god, I'm just now realizing that this is where I got that whole idea from in my own show. Wow. Anyways, what I mean here is that the narrator isn't merely serving as a device to move the story forward, rather they are holding the story back. They are keeping it rigidly in the confines of what is acceptable in a fairy tale, and it isn't until the story revolts against them that it starts to really branch out into something real. This is such an interesting take on the idea of a narrator, and ingenious to boot. It's the whole idea that the mere act of observation changes the nature of a thing, not only in the physical sense as in the sciences, but in the metaphysical, metaphorical way. And then there's my musical, Fantasmagoriana. It's gone through several iterations, but all of them share the same frame, that Claire Clairmont, sister to Mary Shelley, the only person from that summer to have survived, would return to the Villa Diodati with her nephew, Percy Shelley the second. She would remember that summer and its ghosts, and then she would die. The whole show was about ghosts and stories, and it was important that while everyone else has a legacy in the form of their stories, a ghost which lives on in the form of their undying impact on literature, Claire was the facilitator of that fateful summer, and it is her legacy. And nearly everything important actually happens after that summer. So you know what, I won't elaborate too much. I'm just including this show to show that I've relied on a framing device before in my own work. All of these shows, including mine, without their frames would be hollow at best, completely empty at worst. Sunday without the frame is literally nothing at all. Drowsy is a stereotype from the 40s, Phantom is another Weber banger with no insight into the future, Rocky is a drug-fueled queer madness with no through line, Company is just a series of vignettes, and my own show, Fantasmagoriana, is just a historical reenactment that ignores 20% of its characters. The frame works to add to the audience's perception of the writer's intent and to more fully develop the show into something greater than the sum of its parts. In particular, there is the idea that narration can be used as a tool to better immerse the audience, namely in The Drowsy Chaperone, Rocky Horror, Into the Woods, as well as a number of other musicals that I don't love nearly as much but still deserve mentioning, such as Assassins, Cabaret, Ride the Cyclone, Hades Town, Hercules, Evita, the list goes on. It's a trope used over and over and over again, but it still isn't tired, so long as it's innovative in its execution. Looking at Drowsy, instead of dismissing the show as a corny set of tunes that don't really have any strong artistic value, we see it as an endearing homage to the history of theater and the love we have for it. This is because the man in the chair extols the virtues of the musical and is quick to admit and equally defend its many flaws. In Rocky Horror, we see the farcical nature of the musical, and we don't take it seriously, but we do appreciate the plot, however thin it is. This is because the criminologist takes the story incredibly seriously, showing us just how insane it all is. In Into the Woods, we approach these stories as moral tales, as black and white, but end up leaving with moral lessons that aren't so black and white, taking death of the author quite literally. In literature and movies, too, narration is an excellent tool to better shape the perspective of the audience. Perhaps most iconically, Sherlock Holmes is nothing without the narration of his dear companion John Watson, whose perspective and analysis of Holmes makes a human being out of what would otherwise be a procedural schlock. In A Christmas Story, the mature-sounding narration of Little Ralphie lends an air of sophistication to his childlike wants and concerns, making us sympathize with the little guy when he acts like the child that he is. In the Kingkiller Chronicles, Kvothe is completely unreliable, shaping a narrative that we can't trust, where his love interest is perfect and all his mistakes are justified, but we know that it is true to his recollection, at least as true as it can be, while casting him in a favorable light. The Princess Bride, both the book and the movie, are lent a greater humor through their narrations, one being the abridging of the original book, the other being the grandfather telling a story to his grandson, which make the story more relatable, more accessible, more endearing. If on a winter's night a traveler is just a whole other level, and don't even get me started on House of Leaves, I'm getting off track. Needless to say, there are so many directions that I could go with narration. It's incredibly useful as a tool with no limits at all. And it's the direction I'm leaning for my show. I have 4 relevant major concerns with my show. The first and biggest is budget. I want to keep the cast small, with 3 actors at most. The second is accuracy. The number of characters involved is ridiculous, with not just Lavinia and John, but a colonel, a doctor, a sister, a governor, a sheriff, a landlord, a mob, a co-conspirator, a grocer, a guard, an executioner, a lawyer, a reverend, and honestly, I'm probably forgetting a few. And most of them are one-off characters, which leads to my third major concern, recognizability. I need the audience to know these characters on sight, with little introduction lest I fatigue them. And finally, my fourth concern, the legend versus the history. I have a lot of people who are going to show up who want to see the legend of America's first female serial killer, but I have this compulsion where I need to tell the truth. So, what do I do? All of these problems and more can be solved with a narrator.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
I'm gonna have 3 actors in the show. A woman as Lavinia, a man as John, and literally anyone or anything as a ghost tour guide. A tour guide that will tell the legend of Lavinia Fisher, the first female serial killer in America, while we watch the true history of the doomed romance of Lavinia and John play out between the 2 other actors. In the meantime, the tour guide will play the role of all of those other characters that flit in and out of the lives of the Fishers, while simultaneously pulling in the audience to act in the role of all of the crowds needed for the show. That is to say that just like my upcoming show, Fantasmagoriana, as well as the hit shows Sleep No More, The Great Gatsby, and to an extent Drunk Shakespeare, this too will be an immersive experience in which the audience is a part of the story. They are the guests of the 6 Mile House, the mob that accosts the Fishers at their inn, the prisoners at the jail, the congregation at Reverend Furman's church, the crowd gathered at the execution, and so on. The audience is the world, and the tour guide is the bridge between our world and the world of the Fishers. This also opens up an interesting idea in regards to casting. The tour guide will play men, women, children, and everything, so I can cast literally anyone in the role. And each production can cast a completely new individual without any regard for who or what came before, who can develop a completely different take on the role. I'll likely keep singing to a minimum, or just not have them sing at all, to really make it accessible to literally any actor who wants the role. And as a final bonus, I might be able to incorporate the character of the tour guide into the show. In a video a few weeks ago, I talked about the mystery of what was in the box that John Fisher left behind in his last words. There's the idea that its contents are still out there somewhere, not yet claimed by its intended recipient. It's a silly idea, but it's a compelling one. An idea that could potentially be realized with the character of the tour guide. Perhaps they're the last unknown descendant of the Fishers, waiting to receive the contents of the box. Or perhaps they're the last descendant of the caretaker of the box, trying to find the person for whom it is meant. Perhaps they're searching for the box themselves, rightfully or wrongfully. Perhaps they're a ghost brought to the present just to bring the truth to light. Perhaps they're just in the right place at the right time and everything is going to fall into their lap. Perhaps they find the intended recipient in the audience. Or perhaps they open the box as the curtain falls. Just spitballing here. Now, this is not necessarily the final concept for the show, but it is the current idea off of which I'll be basing the show. 2 simultaneous narratives, with one character aware of the audience as they dictate the story, and the other 2 lost in history. Whether or not I'll be going with vaguely defined ghost tour guide as the definitive third character, well, Time will tell. Implementation is going to require some interesting manipulation. I'll begin by plotting out the show, both the historically accurate version and the legend the tour guide will tell. I'll find the areas of overlap and line it all up. I'll determine pacing, scenes, and find those targeted moments which demand a song. I'll likely cycle through this process a few times before I land on a version that I really like, and then I'll move forward with actually writing things, and then I'll revisit the outline again and again and again and again until 2 days before the premiere, when I suddenly realize that I need to switch things around yet again in some brilliant and agonizing way, and my actors end up hating me forever. And regardless of the seemingly never-ending cycle of revisions, I'll be sure to share each step of the way with all of you. Anyways, this is the start. I have the frame, now I just have to fill in the canvas. Next video, we'll be talking about Kurt Vonnegut's rules for writing short stories and how they apply to writing musical theater, and when they don't. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss that, and check out my Patreon where you can subscribe to see all of my videos early, as well as plenty of other stuff exclusive to my patrons. In the meantime, check out the playlist that just popped up on screen somewhere of all the videos on the channel so far showing the journey of my research on this project. See you all in 2 weeks. Bye, y'all.